It's all about werewolves, baby. No, I'm playing, but guys, I'm here to talk about The Wolfman today. It's a movie that just came out in theaters now. I was not initially thrilled to go see it because I thought it would be just another regular old creature feature film, monster flick, and I kind of threw it to the sideway. But after a call and some information from a few of my friends, I decided to give this movie a chance, and boy, am I glad I gave it a chance. So the first part of this video is going to be a spoiler-free discussion about the overall quality of the film and the narrative, and then the second part is going to be me kind of giving a brief synopsis on the film and giving my thoughts on some of the details that they went through and how well this plot and this movie in general is put together. But again, without further ado, let's get into it.
You're now watching The Captain.
So first off, this movie can be summed up by two things. If you are going to speak to any of your friends about this movie and they're gonna ask you about, what was special about it or what you like, the two things I immediately will go just talking about are sound design.
You're scaring me.
And the phrase, making the most out of the least. Because boy, oh boy, did this movie do this. For most horror movies, you tend to see the score and the music in the movie overall be a big proponent in building atmosphere and getting you uneasy and scaring you overall. This movie did what like a regular, really well done, like Scorsese or like pretentious director here movie would do in regards to letting the actors act. This movie and the directors obviously had a lot of faith in the actors using their ability to use their faces, their voices, and their overall general skill as actors to build out what this atmosphere of each scene would be. Because for a lot of the times, the build up to certain jump scares, the unease and attention you normally would get from like maybe like a synth or a riser, you would get just from the actors like being uneasy from certain conversation, or there'd be times where you would hear nothing but them. There's a lot of nothing in regards to the score here, and not in a bad way. And I really enjoyed the ability for them to utilize this, because this didn't just play into part when it comes to the atmosphere of the film, but the general monster itself. So obviously for people watching this movie is called The Wolfman. So the whole thing is revolving around a big werewolf that is hunting his family. And boy, the sound design, the things they did for this werewolf was amazing. So for starters, when it comes to the werewolf, the things about the sound design that was amazing to me was first and foremost, they made you feel him without showing you him. And a lot of different horror movies, I've talked about it before, where the issue I have when it comes to things with demons or monsters, anything with a unique design, is that they show off everything in its full glory way too soon. We talked about it a little bit with Nosferatu and other movies that I've talked about on here on the channel, but this movie does an amazing job at not showing the monster or the werewolf until a pretty good portion into the movie. Now, I still think they showed it maybe a tad bit too early, but it wasn't early enough for me to think it was a problem with the movie. I really enjoyed the time they took to build out the presence of the monster, because you would have scenes where the monster's on the chase and the characters that are running from it or that are interacting with it are obviously seeing it and are terrified of it, but you're not seeing it. You're only hearing its breathing, its stepping, and you're kind of going in from its perspective, hunting down people in certain scenes. And that is amazing to me because it gives a lot of weight and a lot of mystery and a lot of eeriness to the monster. Because right after a scene where it's chasing somebody, if they got away, you would hear the family talk about just how scared they were, like how weird it was, like they're describing it. So you get that image in your head of what it would look like. And for a lot of people, if you watch a lot of different werewolf movies like myself, watching like Underworld or things of that nature, where you kind of get a sense of what lycanthropy looks like in other aspects of horror, this had a very much so like classic design, like really akin to like the old school like Werewolf by London type of feel, where the monster felt more like a grotesque bending of the body versus like the super jacked up monster beast that you would see in something like the Underworld movies. It was really dope. It was really dope to me. And I really enjoyed how that sound design played into giving that monster weight and giving him presence, because that was most of the movie in general, was you using the sound design to alter perspective and alter what really made this monster a presence. And then on top of that, you got to hear that even more when it comes to the aspect of the main character. So I think it's here where I kind of want to start diving into more of the spoiler territory. So for people watching up until this point, again, you guys can pause the video, go watch the movie and come back. But there's not a lot I really can say without spoiling some stuff. So I really got to get into the spoilers. So let's get into the spoilers. outright, it is a very small cast, a very limited area of set, and I love that. Usually self-contained stories like most recently that being the Evil Dead Rise movie, where it took place in one location, and most of horror movies like that. In some cases, a lot of like Shyamalan stuff where it's all in one centralized location. That stuff is dope to me because it really gives the director a challenge to add a dynamic sense of presence to the set, showing it from different perspectives, whether that be from different angles or different lighting effects. It can really help to make this one location feel like it's been a couple different locations. Getting into the small cast of people, this follows a trio of a family. Blake, the father, Charlotte, the wife, and Ginger, the daughter. You get a lot of dope stuff starting from the very beginning of the movie where you're introduced to Blake. From the beginning revolves around Blake and his narrative, and then you kind of bring in the family and they get wrapped into it as well later on. But to start, it's all about Blake. And you start the film with Blake and his father in the woods as they're hunting for deer, and you get a lot of characterization to the character from this child actor. Blake essentially is really soft-spoken. Father is one of those like military or super macho men who are really big on, you do as I say when I say it. And when you don't do it, I kind of freak out on you for a second because I'm so worried about you being hurt. If you're working 3 or 4 jobs, you don't have time to tell a child 3 or 4 or 5 different times not to do something and give them a detailed explanation of why not to do it, because you have to go work and you're tired. So you tell them, hey, don't do this or you'll get hurt, whether that be from the thing or me hurting you because I told you not to do it, rather than be a whooping or whatever it may be. And you kind of get that similar vein here when it comes to Blake and his father. You then learn that Blake did not enjoy that aspect with his father with him growing up. And he essentially, once he's of age, he runs away to the big city and he just leaves his dad behind because he's like, hey, I want to be a different man. I don't want to be like my father. And that comes into play with a lot of the characterization of the character with him and his daughter. This is something in regards to that I find very beautiful in regards to how the relationship of Blake and Ginger are built up. You get to see a little bit of what Blake is like from his child actor, but you immediately get to see like how he's developed and how he's taken that interactions with his father into him in his adulthood. And it's really sweet. You essentially learn that Blake is an amazing human being. Like there's usually in some horror stuff, there's like a dark side to a character and you kind of get that here. But for the most part, Blake is just a good dude. He communicates really well with Ginger and letting Ginger know why she shouldn't be doing stuff. And even if he raises his voice at Ginger, like he kind of lets him know like, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, blah, 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 blah. He's like the prototypical parent that you would imagine when you think of like the perfect parent. But the thing they show you very early on from the beginning is that when he raises his voice at his daughter for doing something that put her in harm's way, and he's kind of really channeling his father, you see him stop, pause, and correct that, and not want to inflict a lot of the traumas that he got as a child onto his daughter. And he's really, 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 really insistent on that. Like whenever he does something that is reminiscent to his father, he stops it, backtracks, and tries to correct that mistake. And that's going to come back into play later on in the movie. Charlotte enters the conversation and she's introduced. She's very distant because she's on her phone talking business. She's kind of cold in regards to like how she briefly interacts with her family, to where she's so locked in on work, she's not really with them, but she's with them in the same room. That's Charlotte's problem here, that she's not really present with her family. And we get the idea that she's been that way for a while now, because for whatever reason, she feels like she doesn't really have much in common with her daughter, and her daughter like retreats from her into her father. So like her father's giving her all the praise and adulation, all the care, all the reassurance, and mama's kind of left there as like I can't even say the disciplinarian, because dad really disciplines her a lot. Kind of like a almost like a babysitter, almost in a way. It's like more of the relationship that Charlotte and Ginger have at the start of the film. At a certain point, though, you then realize that Blake's father has now passed away, and he's found out that he's gotten that knowledge. So the typical trope and setup you see in a lot of horror movies to get characters out of the safe and plush life they have in a city or somewhere else and get them into the dangerous horror-filled area. So his father dies. He decides that, hey, it's probably good for my family if I take us all and go to my childhood home and maybe try to like take the place that gave me a little bit of trauma and some issues and like turn that into a happy memory for my family. Blake is a writer who's in between jobs, and Charlotte is a journalist who's also an inspiring writer. And I guess they've been kind of on the rocks. Like I said before, Charlotte's been retreating away from her family for a while. So Blake says, hey, let's take me, you, and Ginger, go up to the mountains for the summer. You can work remote and you can also continue working on your book. And we'll just have like really great memories at this family house that I've had. And we'll just be away from the world and just be within us. Because he's very adamant on not just losing time with people. Something that I can really empathize with, me having recently lost somebody in my life within like the last 2 years, where when you have that big hit of loss, especially with Blake, to where his only family was like his father and his immediate family he's created now. When you lose somebody who's like a big part of your life, you have this need to want to speak to that person. And he talks about it here. He ignored his dad for quite a long time and didn't even worry about speaking to him. But once that person is gone, you really have like a sense of regret of like, man, I wish I had more time with this person. I wish I had more time to tell them how I felt or fix those problems that we had when I was younger. And that's kind of where Blake is now. So he's like, hey, I want to live in the moment, loving one another, and that we don't just become miserable being around each other. I want to make sure that we are appreciative for the time that we have left around one another, because life is fleeting. Now they're on the road, they're heading to this cabin, and the thing that I find the most interesting about him kind of going back to this cabin, it's really like him addressing a lot of the darkness that was within him, that and a lot of the bad habits he picked up from his father. But you also find out that he has some things about him that he does not enjoy as much. He has like this thing to where it seems like he doesn't like not being heard, because you'll have aspects and moments of the film where like his dad isn't really listening to what he's saying, and his wife is kind of like ignoring what he's saying, but he's like really soft-spoken and he's saying things and trying to convey a message, but like nobody's really listening. And it's very interesting because that comes back into play later on in the werewolf stuff. To fast forward to a lot of stuff, I'm not gonna go through scene by scene, but essentially they're on the way to his father's house. Accident happens because this werewolf is on the road and makes them crash. Werewolf attacks the father, attacks Blake, scratches him, and now Blake is like going to be going through this transformation into a werewolf, into the Wolfman, throughout the entire film. So most of the film is him transforming into the Wolfman and them hiding out and trying to evade the werewolf that's already on the premises chasing them down. Best thing about this movie to me is how detailed and how thought out the transformation into a werewolf is for Blake. Because literally they tie in things that he had issues with personally into the transformation. Like I mentioned earlier, he has this big thing to where he's really soft-spoken and feels like he can't be heard, or that sometimes people ignore him when he's trying to say stuff. And that comes into play with the transformation, because as you're turning into a werewolf with this version of it, it being like this like virus that infects you, it makes it to where you can't understand people. So he is like speaking in his mind and hearing what he has to say, but it's almost like his brain's twisting him to speak dog talk or like animal talk, how animals would communicate with one another. So like the people around him are speaking really like, I guess, mush mouth, almost like Charlie Brown's teacher with the wah 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 wah. It's in the werewolf form, I guess. So he's not being heard by his family, and that's something that's like stressing him out. And it's something that was an issue when he was a person, and now as he's going through this transformation, as he's being distorted into this werewolf and not able to communicate with his family, you then see the transition into Charlotte, the mom, kind of becoming the lead, and her having to be a lot more assertive, and her having to be the one to take command a lot more of this family. And it's interesting because it makes her go away from the aspect of her being a outside viewer and retreating away from her family, and force her to be very present and very active. So again, you can see a lot of the subtext in this film, and it's amazing because it's not preachy. It's something you notice, but it's never said. It's a lot of show and don't tell, and I love that about the writing for this movie. As the film goes on, now the less and less he can do, the more my mom has to do. And this film almost seems to me like the perfect analogy to what like the theoretical perfect marriage is. And because dad couldn't always be on 100 like he normally is for the family, you then see her have to kick in to make this family balance out. And you can kind of see that effect on their daughter. All three of these characters use very well. Now, there are times where the acting can be a little but again, she's a child actor, so I'm not going to critique her too hard. Granted, the standard of child acting has kind of gone up since the It movies for me and a lot of other stuff, but the girl that plays Ginger in this is pretty good. And the Blake and Charlotte's actors are very good as well. There's a lot of subtext here, really presented in a really dope, innovative way to me. Like the script is damn near airtight. And speaking of the script being damn near airtight, you are introduced into more of the cool stuff that I mentioned before in regards to this transformation. I was really intrigued to see like how they would showcase this, because normally when it comes to like lycanthropy and stuff like Underworld or other popular forms of werewolfism, I guess if that's a word, werewolfism, you see the hunger, you see them transforming during the full moon. But this, again, with this form of the virus, is treated like a disease, and it's very like science fiction-esque, but you don't get any science fiction explanations as to like what's going on with his body. You see the form of his face change to make him more werewolf-like. You see his tendencies change as well. He has this like bar on his arm from where the initial werewolf scratched him, where you see him like start to change that. And it was bandaged up, and it was kind of treated as, okay, cool, it's healed up now. We treated it with hydrogen peroxide and we bandaged it up. And it really reminds me a lot of the most recent Candyman movie, to where Yahya Abdul Mateen's character, in that he got a sting from a bee, but you saw that injury get gnarly and nasty over time, even though he bandaged it up and treated it. This is kind of a similar thing too, where his arm got so gnarly and like bloody that it was obviously a really bad injury. And the more interesting thing here when it comes to that injury is that you see Blake start to act like the way Animal would in regards to like how he treats injuries. So if you've ever had a dog, whenever they have some kind of like open wound, a dog's tendency to soothe that wound is to lick at it or like bite at it or gnaw at it to try to give it some kind of a soothing. With this arm injury, his immediate reaction upon seeing it was like gnaw at it and bite at it and treat it like a dog would. Even later on in the movie, you see where he gets caught in a bear trap, and he does what some animals do, some wolves do when they feel like they're in a life or death situation. He bit off his own leg so he could get out of the trap and continue to go on about his life. But I'll say one more thing about it in regards to how they even showcase to you that something's off and he's transforming, is you hear a like thud in the house after they had the initial like chase from the first werewolf. And this thud is something that only he hears because his wife and his daughter are asleep on the couch. And he's just hearing it upstairs in the house, and he goes to check it out, and you find out that this loud thud we've all been hearing is a spider walking around the wall. Imagine like you having a microphone next to that spider's step, and you crank that thing up to like 1,000, and you're just hearing it in depth there. And that goes to show you like, okay, his senses are changing, he's changing. It's such a genius thing to me. Like that reveal to showcase his initial transformation, or the beginnings of the transformation, was so genius to me. And I really, really loved the way that looked there. But to get into a lot of the stuff when it comes to the film, and kind of speed run through some of the stuff, because I've been kind of lingering on. Father was the werewolf that you initially that transformed Blake and caused all this issue going on, because you saw the werewolf and you saw a different one initially in the woods that his father and him were encountering in the like very, very opening credits of the movie. But you see the dad say, hey, I'm determined to kill this thing to protect my son. So it just makes sense for the dad. And something I suspected really early on, if you're thinking about who this werewolf is, you can kind of come to the conclusion that, oh, it's the father. It's Blake's dad. And Blake is essentially becoming his father. And once they revealed like who the werewolf was, I'm not gonna say I gasped, but it was something that I found like so amazingly perfect in regards to like you writing a character, writing a film. Because again, the biggest thing that he was scared of and the thing that he fought against the most was becoming his father. Now his father has like literally forced him to become him, essentially. And they kind of allude to this in some of the subtle writing of the film, because there's like a moment where Blake is speaking with Ginger and he's like, hey, you know, sometimes a father's pursuit to protect them, well, I'm not gonna say it like that because that sounds very proper, but he said it in a way of like, sometimes a daddy trying so hard to protect his kids from something, he becomes that thing that hurts his kids the most. And that was so beautifully written. Like this movie has a lot of subtext that is just, again, I've talked about it earlier, and I know I feel like I'm rambling here, but it's amazing. This movie is really amazingly written. And the last thing I think there is to speak on, because there's not a lot of deaths in this film. There's like one death that's not even really gory because it happens off screen and you see like the remains of the person. But because the whole movie is essentially just them running away from the dad, from Blake's father as a werewolf. And you see the death of Blake's father, I guess, on screen. And then you see there's an off-screen death of like a character they met really early on in the movie. The last two things I really want to bring up really quickly, because I've talked about the sound design, I've talked about the acting and some of the writing for the film. And these things kind of go hand in hand. It is the cinematic aspects that they have in here and the cinematic style of this director, as well as how that blends into the actual monster design. I mentioned before how this design is a lot akin to the old school werewolf, and it is amazingly put together. It's like a minimalist makeup almost, to where like you see a lot of the resemblance and the leftover remains of the actor below all the prosthetics, but the prosthetics aren't so minimal that it just seems like he got a little bit of a facelift. Like it seems like a completely different person, but you see the remnants of him there, and you can tell that this is like, if not 100% practical, like 90% practical in regards to the way it's done. It looks really amazing in this makeup, and a lot of the transformation scenes and him kind of like reforming his bone structure in certain areas at a certain part. It's really, really dope in the way it's done. I really think this is really clean, and the practical effect team for this, I can't give enough of a praise to, because y'all did y'all thing on this. Then lastly be the cinematic quality of the film. I mentioned earlier how the statement that I would really give this movie is the aspect of doing the most with the minimal. This applies to like some of the cinematic aspects of it as well, because the shots are dope. The lighting for it and editing for it are dope because they're used in ways to, one, control the atmosphere, like I mentioned before. Like I told you, there's not a lot of sound here to build atmosphere, but it's a lot in the lighting in characters' faces and a lot in the lighting of a room in general. And a lot of things, like literally like the lighting for this is the glue that keeps the entire movie together in regards to how you feel watching it. The role shift, like I mentioned before, with the perspective shifts, that's usually done by the lighting that's changed from the way that Blake is perceiving the world now as a werewolf versus how Charlotte is perceiving the world. And then you also have moments to where he's going through this transformation and you're seeing that light kind of shift more rapidly. And it's something that you don't notice at first because it's really subtle, but as it gets more drastic because he's getting further and further in his transformation, you start to see that perspective shift and who you're seeing things from the perspective of and who you're hearing things from the perspective of. It's amazingly done, man. I can gush about this movie all day. And this is probably gonna be one of my favorite movies of the year. I'm gonna call it. I'm gonna predict this because, again, we got a lot of time to go and it's really early on in the year. It's the first month, but this is really well done. Like if this movie came out last year, it'd probably be up there for one of the better movies of the year, maybe in my top 5. This is going to be a movie that I really would advise a lot of people to watch. I could rewatch this movie a couple different times because it's not absorbently long. It's not a lot of convolutedness. The story's really compact and really tight. The practical effects are cool. It's not super gory, so I feel like kids can watch this as well. Not kids, but you know, PG-13 as like teenagers essentially. It's gonna be a good movie for everybody. There's a lot of things here for everybody. For the people that just want to see good movies develop together, for the people that just want to see a good scary movie on a night out, and people that just want to see a good movie in general. This has everything for you in one big go. So again, if you guys have not seen The Wolfman yet, I highly advise you guys to check this movie out and go give it a look. And please let them know that the captain sent you when you go get your tickets. Again, I'll probably give The Wolfman a solid like 10 werewolf fangs out of 10. Like this is the dope movie. This is damn near a perfect movie in regards to how well it's put together. So again, shout out to the directors, shout out to the actors. I did not do my due diligence to look up the names. Again, editor, can you put the names of the actors and the directors here, please, somewhere in the video? And again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And this has been Captain Lee's of Captain Lee's Dojo, and I'll see you guys.